Old World Blues is the third Fallout New Vegas DLC, and it's a lot of superlatives. It has the longest intro dialogue, it's the weirdest, wackiest, sci-fi pulpiest, and dungeon crawliest of the DLCs, and that's not even half of it. It also ties up a bunch of loose ends from the previous DLCs and is a not so subtle showcase of the oftentimes satirized hypocrisy of the Fallout universe's pre-war society. You didn't expect that last part, did you? In order to access this DLC, you need to go to the Mojave drive-in at midnight, because Old World Blues is a midnight showing. From the very beginning, this DLC sets you up for an old school genre movie experience. Once you interact with the crashed satellite, you wake up in a very alien landscape surrounded by a force field. You quickly see that you are indeed still somewhere on Earth, but things feel weird. The game quickly tells you that your body is light, one brain, one heart and one spine. Interestingly enough, you're still somehow functioning. This place is called The Sink, and it's gonna be your headquarters during this DLC, one really great addition to the game in general. Something that kinda missed till this point, even if you could own an apartment in Megaton. It wasn't as expensive as The Sink. And this is a concept that I think Bethesda took when developing the settlements in Fallout 4 and basically offering you a big place in Diamond City where you would be somewhat close to the middle of the map. Well, in Old World Blues, your headquarters is right smack in the middle of a giant crater that used to be a mountain. The place being called Big Mountain, which is shortened to Big MT, and if you pronounce things quickly, Big MT sounds like Big Empty, which is very apropos considering that it is both not empty, but becomes ironic when you find out that the place used to be an actual mountain, as the name entails, that was somehow detonated out of existence. After a couple hours in the crater, you start to understand how that's not something out of the ordinary. The intro dialogue, which is a bit of a tradition with this DLC since you need to hit the ground running, is really long in Old World Blues, but it's kinda required because there are so many characters to deal with, and I gotta say, it's not unentertaining.
Noses? By the great static, these lobotomites confound me with their sheer number of useless extremities.
This is where you get your introduction to the BrainBots. Literally, a bunch of brains of pre-war scientists have been preserved in biogel and have been steadily losing their minds over the past 200 years of untreated childhood trauma combined with the lack of biological needs and what looks to be a gigantic drug habit. And when I say gigantic, I mean gigantic. The amount of mentats you find all over the crater is insane. On the one hand, I understand why mentats would be the helper of choice for the scientists, but I also think the discourse here is a little bit deeper than that, and I'll come back to it later in the video.
It is by will alone I set my mind in motion. It is by the juice of Safu that thoughts acquire speed, the lips acquire stains, stains become a warning. It is by will alone I set my mind in motion.
The brains explain, to the best of their capacity, how it is that you're still functioning. Basically, your brain, heart and spine have been replaced with super advanced technology. And what they need you for. A very basic MacGuffin hunt at first sight. Besides their really weird look of brains suspended in jars of biogel floating above the ground and each featuring 3 monitors, they not only look alien but also act like aliens in relation to you, what they term a lobotomite. You quickly find out that there are other lobotomites around the crater, but they're properly mindless. For whatever reason, you still have your wits about you. The BrainBots have been removed from their bodies for so long that they no longer have any frame of reference for what a human body is, how it's supposed to work, and are likewise confused by the location and number of penises the average human has.
And are those penises I see wriggling on its feet? Disgusting.
Penises are much larger than those tiny extremities. Not that I would know.
I don't recall the human penis ever being that large.
Now it's holding up an array of fully erect hand penises. Keep your filthy penis-tipped feet out of our labs and secrets. You must walk upon your many penised feet.
Anyway, they also tell you about this other brain, this mad scientist type, Dr. Mobius.
It is I, Dr. Mobius, transmitting from my dome-shaped dome in the Forbidden Zone, a zone that is, yes, forbidden to you!
Who threatens them and sets his robo-scorpions, yes, those are real, from his forbidden zone to threaten their lives. You get to hear Mobius all throughout the game because he constantly broadcasts his insane speeches and threats through his robo-scorpions as well as other speakers around the crater. There is something deeply weird and interesting about the brains. Each of them has, or at least had, their own specialties in the pre-war times, and they have very different personalities with super particular quirks and fetishes. They are definitely worth talking to in depth and doing quests for, not only because of the fucking ridiculous dialogues you'll have or the occasional rewards, but because it will allow you to access the peaceful ending if you do. But that's enough about the BrainBots for now. Let's go back to numero uno. The BrainBots task you with finding 3 pieces of technology. The first thing you need to find is a pulse wave upgrade for a sonic emitter you receive,
and 8's sonic sound wave emitter projectile gun, able to broadcast sound at lethal frequencies.
Using a technique unknown to us, a technique involving sound.
The second thing is a stealth suit, and the third is part of an antenna. The brains then unleash you upon the crater, and it is up to you whether or not you go straight for the quest locations or explore all the other buildings that dot the barren landscape. Having your brain removed and misplaced, and as a result have the heart and spine removed because they needed the brain to tell them what to do, not only does not hinder your life progress in any way, shape or form, but the perks obtained in exchange are truly super useful. The brainless perk will make your head immune to being crippled, gives you 25% resistance to chem addiction and 5% to damage threshold. All of those are great and useful. The Heartless perk makes you immune to poison, improves the effect of healing items by 25% and halves the crit chance from robots. Again, all of those are awesome, and the robot one makes super sense, especially in this DLC. The Spineless perk gives you +1 to strength, +1 to damage threshold and makes your torso immune to being crippled. Now, if you're keeping track, when you add them up, your head and torso are now immune to being crippled. You're also immune to being poisoned, you are more resistant to becoming addicted, your healing items work better, and you generally take less damage. And you'd think that's overkill, but as a level 45 plus courier, I can tell you that they will save your ass more than just a couple of times, because exploring the big empty is dangerous. You have to fight mainly robotic enemies, and most ballistic weapons aren't great at that. So you need to rely on the sonic emitter weapon from earlier and a few other energy weapons you find to deal with most of the threats. It has to be said that the majority of ammo that you will find will be energy weapon ammo. Even if you could arguably play with ballistics weapons, it's gonna be extra annoying, so I actually decided to use a perk to tag energy weapons and bring it up to 100 in order to deal with this DLC in a more, less annoying manner. Despite the increase in damage threshold from the perks, you will still take a crap ton of damage. I think I went through something like 80 stim packs during this DLC, and making your own is super important. Crafting in general is important in this DLC, especially when it comes to stim packs and ammo of any kind. So each of those 3 things you will find in their individual research installations. Buildings dedicated to those objects generally, and within 2 of them you must engage in a series of tests in order to solve the quest. When it comes to the stealth suit from building X13, you have to basically run a sort of obstacle course, and you can do it through several levels of difficulty. You only need to start the basic one in order to finish the quest, but successfully finishing each level of difficulty will upgrade the stealth suit. I wholly suggest you take the time to do all of them, because at the end, your stealth suit will give you +25 sneak, +20% movement speed while crouched, and +1 to perception and agility. Those buffs are not to be ignored, especially if you, like me, enjoy playing a sneaky ninja once in a while. I should mention that the stealth suit has a sort of included AI that speaks to you on occasion, and that will automatically administer stim packs and medex if they're available in your inventory when your HP dips under half.
Was that all?
The other building that requires you running the tests is X8, where you have to do two different things in order to finish the quest, but you can increase the level of difficulty in this case as well. X8 also features a bunch of other weird things. There were some DNA splicing experiments being done here, which you can conduct yourself as well with fairly dubious results, besides Roxy, who is a very good girl, and grave robbing. Yeah, that would be weird if this wasn't the Fallout universe, where grave robbing is not only not, abnormal, but in Fallout 2 there is actually a reputation title that goes with it. I mentioned at the beginning how Old War Blues is the dungeon crawliest of the DLCs, but I double down on that and say it's the dungeon crawliest area of the entire game. Now, I know that the Fallout games are almost never described as dungeon crawlers for fairly valid reasons. They're sandboxy open world games where you can go anywhere on the map and do a lot of different things. There are stories, plots, and generally interesting NPCs to deal with, but one also has to realize that most of what you generally do in the game amounts to exploring locations, getting into fights, and looting corpses. Basically, dungeon crawling. So using that as my jumping off point, Old War Blues is by far the best example of this type of gameplay design, seeing as how the various locations are closely packed in together, the plotline is pretty thin on purpose, and most of what you do is go into buildings, fight stuff, and take items. Not to mention the fact that, like I said earlier, there are at least a couple of buildings where you might want to visit and run through several times in order to get better rewards. Like in a dungeon crawler. This feeling is only added to when at the end of the DLC you receive a special teleporter switch, basically, which allows you to get out and return to the crater whenever you wish. The game basically telling you, hey, when you're in the mood for some certain dungeon crawling without having to walk for 15 minutes, beam yourself back. And there's lots of varied locations to discover. There's a mysterious cave where you find a gigantic bloatfly that obviously has been heavily experimented on, because in its corpse you will find 13 buff out, 17 psycho, and 26 empty syringes. Or you find the neighborhood where the doctors used to live back when they were still humans, which is very reminiscent of a certain fairly creepy, spooky part of Fallout 3. This is also where you'll find a baby Deathclaw that will fuck your shit up. There's also these interesting color-coded signs you find all across the crater. They kinda look like the Starship Enterprise, but they're the flag of the old United States. When they're red, it means they're hostiles inside. When they're blue, it means there's a cache of useful things inside. And when they're white, it means you're on a valid pathway. Old War Blues has more NPCs than the previous DLCs put together. And while the BrainBots are super weird and interesting, they're not as weird as the personalities of the various electric and electronic appliances in your headquarters. You have a central command center sort of thing that you speak with, which is the only trader and repairer in the DLC.
Salutations and felicitations, sir, and a most jocund welcome to the scene. I am your electronic valet and household central processor. May I be of service, sir?
But you can also find recordings with the personalities of many other appliances when you explore the crater. Once you find these, you will not only gain access to their very unique abilities, but also their very particular personalities. There's an autodoc that will fix you up and can also implant you with some buffs for a lot of money. There's a biological research station that will grow plants for you.
Yeah, all circuits online, ready to receive your seed.
A talking jukebox who can tweak your sonic emitter, 2 super thirsty light switches that can improve your stats temporarily, an anti-communist book chute that can create blank books, a sink that is a germaphobe.
Do you know how many germs are in 1 cubic centimeter of dirt? 70, 100, gajillion.
A tiny Securitron called Muggy who will break down coffee cups for you.
Do you know how many coffee cups giant robot brains and jars use on a daily basis? Not fucking many!
And my favorite, the toaster.
I am online once again! Tremble, world, before my electric heating coil of doom!
Now, let's think back a couple of videos ago, as well as explanations of where the vending machines, holograms, and hazmat suits come from. All of them come from a place called Big Mountain, where apparently the cuttingest of cutting-edge science and engineering was being worked on before the war. So we're there. The source of the vending machines, the autodocs, the holograms, the ghost people, hazard suits from the Sierra Madre, and something else. When exploring the crater, you stumble upon two very interesting terminal entries in two different places. In the Z43 innovative toxins plant, you find an entry saying that Sinclair has asked for help from Big Mountain to deal with some strange toxins in the Sierra Madre. The doc sent him the Y-17 trauma suits to act as chemical suits, but there's this one line that stands out. Quote, "Looks like they're following up an experiment with another experiment?" End of quote. That sounds dubious, but there's lots of Big Mountain tech in the Sierra Madre, so any of those could be considered experimental. Once you reach the Y-17 building, however, you find three terminal entries. Two of them explain how the trauma harnesses work, and one of them is called Sierra Madre Test Case, in which it stated that, quote, "The Sierra Madre would be a test case for the autodoc and the innovative toxins research," end of quote. And, well, there's only one never before seen toxin present in the Sierra Madre that cannot be found anywhere else in the Mojave. The conclusion is obvious. Big Mountain is also the source of the cloud. But how? Why would the Big Mountain scientists experiment on honest capitalist American citizens? Well, this is where we get into the hypocrisy angle.
We could use that city as a controlled experiment. Vault-Tec was much better at it, of course. We had to make do. Get permission. Sometimes. If only we could have used commie cities. But capturing whole cities was hard, so we captured enough commies to make cities of our own. So we had a group of Chinese prisoners to experiment on. Those were the days. But the true test was science on unsuspecting Americans. Whether it was holograms, new autodocs, toxins, vending machines, we wound them up, let them go into tiny, isolated towns. Then we observed.
This is an aspect of pre-war society that we as Fallout players have been aware of since the reveal of Fallout 2. That the vaults were mainly designed to function as scientific and sociological experiments, but what the scientists at Big Mountain were doing was even more devious than that. I mean, on the one hand, they were imprisoning Chinese Americans and experimenting on them during the war with China. This happened for close to a decade before the Great War, which by the way lasted all of 2 hours. But with the Sierra Madre, Sinclair was paying them for all the technology, and they were not only taking his money but also fucking him over. And he wasn't the only one. In this video we finally closed the loop on one of the longest running stories that have gotten my attention since the vanilla game, Vault 22. I spent a chunk of my New Vegas video detailing the feeling of exploring Vault 22 without realizing how long-lived that piece will actually be, because that story continued into Honest Hearts, where we found out what happened to the survivors of Vault 22, and that's where the story functionally ended. But the thing is, it did not actually start in Vault 22. One of the installations in Big Mountain is called the X-22 Botanical Garden. This is the only place in this DLC where you can find a lot of plants, and not just that, you can also find some old friends in the shape of spitter plants and spore carriers. You can even find the patient zero of the fungal infection that would be sent to Vault 22 very much on purpose. So the story of the fungal infection from Vault 22 actually began here, and we finally managed to tie up that loose end. And speaking of that, I wasn't done with the connections between Old War Blues and Dead Money. When you talk to the BrainBots, they have some patchy mentions of interacting with other guests prior to you. One of them was none other than Elijah. This is where he found out about the Sierra Madre and where he perfected the slave color technology. You find traces of him in some areas of the crater, and his modified energy weapons are possibly the most powerful ones you'll find in Big Mountain. This is also where Christine got operated on initially. She was on a mission from the Circle of Steel to assassinate Elijah, but due to some robots interfering, she got injured and automatically transported to the Y-17 medical facility. She would have most likely been lobotomized if it wasn't for the third visitor from the Mojave, this other courier in whose tracks you've been traveling throughout the entirety of the game.
Of course. You must have met others in your travels. This one had met other couriers too, although it sounded as if he hadn't met the correct one.
So Big Mountain was the double starting point for the Sierra Madre, both in terms of the cloud as well as Elijah and Christine's involvement with it. Another loose end tied by finding its beginning. Okay, let's get back on the main track of the DLC. After you obtain the 3 items, the BrainBots send you to confront Dr. Mobius and take him down once and for all. And it has to be said that considering what you've been hearing about him and hearing his threats all throughout the crater,
Mighty think tank, still cowering in your dome? Cower, you fools, cower. My robo-scorpions will soon conquer the crater. It's just that this is a big place, so it's hard to conquer everything. Oh, Klein, did I mention that my zone is forbidden to you? So forbidden.
having to deal with his robo-scorpions, not to mention finding a gigantic one guarding his lair, you're expecting one hell of a fight. Well, that's only true if you want it.
Atomics? Atomics!
Because you'll find that Mobius, while addled by a mented habit and subject to the same degradation that has affected the other BrainBots, is completely opposite to what you were expecting. He is a very nice dialogue partner who explains his reasoning for threatening the Robo-Brains and building the Robo-Scorpions. And you kinda wanna side with him, honestly, but he does have your brain after all, so he's definitely a dick, right? Well, no. It turns out your brain's a dick, and you tell it that.
Well, that's a fine how do you do. Me, a, quote, dick, unquote. As if I'm the one responsible for the way you carry on gadding about the wastes.
Yeah, in Old War Blues you get to have a very frank conversation with your own brain about your adventuring and hygiene habits, and you have a series of decisions to make as to what your relationship with your brain will be going forward. Oh yes, so minor spoiler now, the reason why you can still function even in the absence of your brain is because you were shot in the head at the beginning of the game. Mobius explains it in more detail, but that's the gist of your specialness in this scenario, and I have to be honest, I do not dislike it. Regardless of what you decide here, you will end up confronting the BrainBots, and like I said earlier, you'll have to choose between a violent confrontation or a very pacifist one, depending on your previous interactions with them. Oh, also, it deserves mentioning that during your talk with Mobius, he literally references the story that you've been enacting.
In short, brains, a heart, and courage. Spine. I think there was a story once where a band of murderous thugs sought these things. They had them all the time in the story. Didn't stop them from murdering to get them. And it won't stop the think tank either.
And now it's time for Stefan's Miscellaneous Musings. Fighting robots and weapon repair kits. This DLC really threw me for a loop because of the large number of robotic enemies and my complete lack of anti-robot capabilities, because ballistic ammo is in relative short supply. I'm not saying it can't be done, of course it can be done. I'm just saying it's extra annoying and it was easier to tag up energy weapons and shift into using them, because the sonic emitter has some really nice abilities when it critically hits, and it does extra damage to robots and power armor. The sonic emitter abilities can be changed by the jukebox in your headquarters when you find upgrades across the crater. You find weapons in the crater, but if they're not the weapons you were focused on or that you prefer, then repairing them will get close to impossible, even with jury rigging. So what do you do in this case? You make weapon repair kits. Thankfully, this DLC is filled with the components required to make them, so start collecting them and make yourself repair kits as early as possible. The stealth suit. I would have liked more interaction with the suit. The suit speaks to you on occasion, but her lines, it's a female voice, are fairly limited, but they give you the impression of a quirky and sarcastic personality.
This should be easy, as long as I don't screw up again. I bet no one has ever been as unnoticed as me.
It's super great that the suit will administer stimpaks and medics as long as you have them in your inventory.
We're out of stimpaks. Maybe you'd be better off with an autodoc suit.
But it's even better that she will let you know when your Pip-Boy light is on, which is an important thing to not have on, especially when you're sneaking.
Nobody ever notices me, but they notice the Pip-Boy light.
I just think it would have been cool for the suit to have dialogue lines like a companion would.
Starting combat. Just kidding.
The Y-17 trauma harness. I love the design of the trauma harness enemies. To me, they look like the ghost astronaut from that one Scooby-Doo episode that I always thought was one of the more interesting monsters. Besides this, there's the connection with the ghost people from Dead Money, and we find the explanation behind the behavior of both the ghost people and the skeletons in All War Blues. The trauma harnesses learn and replicate the movements of the people who wore them, as a means of probably helping them and returning them in case they're hurt and can't move. But knowing what we know about their build quality, they're nothing more than walking caskets.
Attention, lobotomites! Do not neglect to wash the walking eye!
By the way, if that voice sounded familiar, like it did to me, this is why.
It's a walking eye, Hank, and the government loves him. What does it do? I don't know, walking eye stuff. Whatever, this isn't rocket science. Alright, it could be considered a branch of rocket science.
The entire feel of the DLC is very light-hearted and tongue-in-cheek, harkening back to B-grade genre movies from the 50s. Much like how the entire Fallout universe is a retro-futuristic take on what people in the 50s thought the future would be like. But I posit that the BrainBots can be read differently. They're supposed to represent the cuttingest of cutting-edge scientific minds of pre-war society. But what we find are incompetent, incoherent, frustrated, repressed, mentally truncated psychopaths who all have some form of childhood trauma that took over once their meat-sack bodies were discarded. When you add to this 2 centuries of insufficient maintenance, a serious drug habit, and an unshakable belief in their superiority, they become a poignant representation of our contemporary and real-life version of the United States. When you stop and do the math, even though Old War Blues' plotline is basically post-apocalyptic Wizard of Oz, its story contribution to the world of Fallout New Vegas is colossal. Looking at things backwards in time, it is a nexus of a lot of things that have been happening in the Mojave for decades, if not centuries. It turns out this is where Cazadors and Night Stalkers come from. It's also where the Vol 22 fungal infection came from, and it's also where Sinclair got holograms, vending machines, and trauma suits, but unbeknownst to him, this is the source of the cloud as well. It's where Elijah experimented on ghouls and perfected his bomb collar technology. It's also where he found out about the Sierra Madre from this other courier that seems to have been a couple of steps in front of you for the entirety of the game. This same courier is the one who saved Christine from certain death, and from whom you find some recorded messages in the Big Empty. This is where we hear Ulysses' voice for the first time and understand that he's been waiting for us to get to him.
The courier knows the way, and at the divide, her and I, there, we'll have an ending to things.
Which is what will happen in the next and final New Vegas DLC. See you next time, dear Fallout friends, on the Lonesome Road. If you're still here, then it means you like the video. So consider checking out my Patreon page if you can and wish to support me financially. If you can't do that but you would still want to see my channel grow, please actually like the video, subscribe, and click that bell notification, and obviously share my videos wherever you think they make sense. I've been Stefan. Thank you very much for watching, have a great rest of your day, and see you next time.